Hello. Hello, everybody. If you are joining us live here for this watercolor Skillshare nature thing, drop in the chat where you're coming from. Love to know. And hello to everybody who was on the retreat last week where I did a live with the absolutely delightful, also Skillshare teacher, Peggy Dean. So welcome. And if you were there, I got some sleep. So yeah. Anyway, welcome. We're going to do some nature-inspired watercolor, and I'm really happy to be here. If you don't know me yet, by the end of this, you will. My name is Jen Dixon, and I'm an artist. I'm American and British. I've lived in England for basically the majority of my adult life, so I kind of float around with my accent, so I apologize for that in advance. But I live in Cornwall, and Cornwall is kind of like this almost a peninsula, big peninsula kind of chunk off of England. And so kind of like the Florida over here, but yeah, so that kind of geography. And as you can imagine, it's very much like a tourist destination, things like that. It's also incredibly beautiful. And when I was filming that little trailer telling you a little bit about what we're going to do in this workshop, I mentioned the connection to nature, and I mentioned not really loving my own artwork for a very long time. And that's true because as I go right back through my decades of making art and making marks, I found myself gravitating towards certain kinds of lines and certain kinds of shapes. And when I learned to draw when I was very, very tiny, I learned how to break things down into shapes. There was a children's book author named Ed Emberley. So if you are familiar with that, give a shout in the chat because I'd love to know who else learned to draw shapes from Ed Emberley. But when I moved to Cornwall, it's like all of these shapes and these lines and everything that I had known and had studied all of a sudden came together because of the nature of the coast. All of a sudden I saw these shapes and the lines and the cracks and the colors. Everything started to make sense, and it really shaped the way that I make art. And I've spent a long time doing a lot of teaching as well, including life drawing. And I'm going to flip my camera down to my desk so you can see a little bit of stuff on my desk. These will be the images that were used in the promotions for this. But you can see here these beautiful leaves, and they're very basic shapes. They look a little extra fancy because they're done in colors, and watercolor always makes things look a little special anyway. But when I was teaching life drawing and all sorts of things, I was really genuinely bringing a lot of that Ed Emberley way of seeing shapes in everyday things. So you take a three-dimensional object, like something like this, and you start to look at it as if you're looking at it flat. As best as you can, you try and see it flat. And that's always that weird disconnect that an artist has with a three-dimensional object. And we learn to get over that. We learn to make two-dimensional what we see in three dimensions. I'm going to help you a little bit with that. But really, it wasn't until I moved to Cornwall before all of those like puzzle pieces started to really come together. And I started really liking what I was doing because I think what I think I kind of found the glue to what binds nature and mark. And if you've taken some of my Skillshare classes, hopefully you've taken my charcoal drawing boot camp where I profess my undying love for charcoal. And I wholly recommend every artist really get to know charcoal as a medium, even if you don't work in it, even if you prefer cleaner sorts of materials. I think charcoal, getting to grips with that like absolute most basic material and having it be sort of a part of you. I think that can really help foster that connection, make that glue between what we see and what we perceive and what we want to draw, what our brains tell us to draw based on lots of things that it thinks it knows. You'll find that glue that marries that into what you put in 2 dimensions on the page. So back to my desk. Isn't that fancy? I learned how to do that recently. So, right. We're going to start with some warm-up marks. And I very strange. I've got the chat on another thing off to the side, but I think there's a lag, so I'm just gonna have to cover myself up because I keep thinking that maybe my camera isn't switched, but it is. So I'm just gonna correct that really quick. So this is how you know it's live. We do all these like endearing little things on the fly. Right. I'm trying to be so quiet and cautious with it. There we go. Now all I can see is the chat, but mind you, the chat's going to be just a little bit behind. Technology, eh? Right. So here we are with our shapes. You'll hopefully have already downloaded in the description of this video. I have made you a guide. This is a 4-page document, and I've printed it out just so that I can have ease of reference here for you. But what we're using today, I'm just going to gloss through this really quickly. And if you're joining me with digital, this all applies to you too, and you will see inside. Basically, most of my diagrams and examples inside the document have been done in Procreate. So this translates whether or not you're digital or traditional medium. So on the front here, here's a little, so that one is actually watercolor. And what we're going to use today is watercolor, any old paper. You'll see me using cold pressed watercolor paper from De La Rowney. This is just an A4 size pad. It's not a block. It doesn't matter. We're just having fun today. This is low pressure stuff. When I say medium round watercolor brushes, I've got a little handful off to the side. I've got De La Rowney, and I've got our friend Peggy Dean. I've got her pigeon letters. Any of these sizes are going to be just fine. What I would encourage you to do is to try a brush a little bigger than you are typically comfortable with. So something like this might be a fantastic challenge if you've got something like that on hand. Otherwise, just go with something, like a reasonable size, what I would call a medium. This is a number 10. So if you're going by the numbers, anywhere between, I would say, a 6 and a 14 will be probably about what I would aim for, unless you're feeling brave and you want to go for a big one. So optionally, you can have some crayons or colored pencils, things like that, for if we get time for a little bit of mixed media, which would be very, very fun indeed. And also, oh, I just see in the chat somebody's mentioned Ed Emberley's Fingerprints. Yes. Oh, I don't have that particular book, but I do know of that one. I've got his animals and I think Make a World. Anyway, all that aside. And if you are joining with digital, so on your iPad or other device, and you've got Procreate or Adobe Fresco, those are just fine too. I would recommend just using a stock brush. You'll see in my examples inside the PDF, I used the syrup brush, which is one of the stock ones that comes with Procreate. Some brushes will work a little bit better than others. So just try them a little bit, but try to have something that will give you a nice, big, bold mark, but still be a little bit pressure sensitive and give you that little bit of variety. So I'm going to skip to page 3 really quickly, and you'll see that these are done in Procreate. And on the very last page, that whole spray of flowers, that's done using only the syrup brush in Procreate. So you can still do some remarkable things with exactly what comes with the application. Oh, hi, Esther. I see Esther in the chat. And Lena. Oh, look at all you guys. I'm getting distracted. I wanna shout out to all of you, but I'm going to hush and we're gonna paint. So looking at this PDF quickly, I've provided you with some reference photos. Now you do see that I've got some twigs and things hanging around. Well, I've sort of bodged together a little clip. And anytime I clip something into this, it makes me feel like I've got this really, really funny little bonsai almost. But you will see one of these just on screen. So you are welcome to try from whatever I have on screen. I'll try to put it something like that so that you can see a little bit of it. Or feel free to work off of a two-dimensional photograph, either from the ones that I've provided for you or something that you have on your computer, whatever, doesn't matter. What I want it to be though, is I want it to be simple. So you can see with all three of these are kind of like easy, mid, and hard mode, I would say. I didn't really put them in order like that, but if I'm just taking a glance at this I would say is probably going to be the easiest. And the reason for that is you've got a fairly straight line and you've got leaves that really sort of look at you sort of face on. So they're not doing a whole lot of this dimensional foreshortening. So foreshortening is the term for when it looks like a completely different shape looking right at it, like pointing at somebody. I guess I could point at the camera. You can see how you can't tell how long my finger is when it's like that, but you can tell when it's like that. So that's why this one here is probably the easiest one to take care of because they're fairly predictable shapes to deal with. When you look at this one here, this has lots of different shapes going at different angles. It looks a heck of a lot more complicated, but I promise you, by the end of this little workshop, you're going to be painting things like this, and you're going to love them. It's going to be great. That's one of the beauties of silhouette, and you can see here with these two silhouettes, I just did those by messing with the sliders in Photos in the app on the Mac. So even just learning to see those silhouettes, you can already get a little bit of a head start. Like if you get stuck and you're not really quite sure what's wrong, you can try doing a little photo manipulation to simplify it. And maybe that will help you because then what you can do is instead of looking at something in dimensional space, you can begin to see, oh, there's this cutout of negative space here and this cutout of negative space here. So that will give you a little bit of an extra edge on finding these shapes. So I talk about finding these shapes. Just going to skip to this page. I'll tuck that aside just a little bit. When I was looking at this particular twig, which no longer exists because it dried out, but this particular twig, I could see in it three very distinct sorts of shapes, and I call them diamonds and kites, domes, and teardrops. When I look at that, hopefully you are also seeing that you can get diamond shapes, domes, and there are some teardrops in there. Now that's not all the leaves, of course. There are what I would just sort of call your more nebulous and more complicated shapes. So those are going to be your twists and curls and those foreshortened blobs where you can't really tell length and depth or width or whatever. So those are a little bit trickier to see. So oftentimes I leave those to be the secondary leaves that I add. This is a way of drawing. There are lots of different ways to draw. This is just one way of drawing. Most of the time, if I were going for accuracy, I would ask you to sort of block out visually, maybe in a little bit of pencil, where you think the outermost edges of that shape are, like as a whole. Like how much space does that twig take up? Like this one. How much space? And then you can start to think more accurately. This way of painting is a lot looser. This is a lot more free. This is a lot less adhering to the rules. But if you can keep your eye out for those diamonds and kites, domes and teardrops, you're going to be just fine without a preliminary drawing. I know it feels like going without a safety net, but I promise you're going to be surprised at the results. This is taking that same twig, the actual photograph of it, and tweaking it so that it filled with color. This was my representation of it. I chose to leave the curly Q off the end because I couldn't get it to look right. And, actually, I just trimmed it off. It's fine. But you can see how close, even by not having a drawing in place first, but how very close you can get just by looking for those major shapes. And then you can always combine them into lovely bouquets. Use in Procreate, you can use the distortion and the warp, and you can layer these things. So you can get a nice big bunch. This is a great way to make stamps in Procreate too, but that's another class for another time. Right, so we're going to be looking for those diamonds, domes, and teardrops. And then we're going to throw in some of those weird shapes. Now, just a tip with those stranger shapes, squinting your eyes can help you see them more clearly, which sounds a bit strange, but it works. And so, yes, tips for today. And these go for watercolor or digital. I want you to use a larger brush than you feel like you might normally choose. The reason for that is we're going for these big shapes, and we're going to be using the brush as something that lays down large chunks of color, not small details, except for maybe the odd twig here and there. But we're not going to be drawing the outlines of any leaves. We're going to let them be really organic, and it's going to be great. We're going to let go of perfectionism because nature isn't perfect. I mean, come on, look at that. There are no leaves on this. Why are there no leaves on that? If it was perfect, it would have leaves on that, but it doesn't. So let go of it. Little details can help, but use sparingly when working in silhouette. And what I mean by that is you need to go right into that inner editor, that inner critic, and I want you to start leaving out some bits. Because as an artist, part of your job, I guess, part of your reason for doing is because you were putting whatever you're drawing or painting into your own unique vision, your own unique way of seeing. It's not a photograph. So if you need to leave something out, it's no different than if you were to take a landscape and you're painting this beautiful landscape, but you remove the telephone poles because they don't work in the photo, or they don't work in the painting. They're accurate in a photo, but they don't work in a painting. So I want you to remember that, and I want you to edit out things that aren't necessarily the tricky bits, but maybe they just don't contribute anything to the final piece. And that's that thing I said about squinting if you find foreshortened shapes difficult to look at. Here's a quick tip on foreshortened shapes. I'm going to find something on my desk. Okay. This. It's an eraser that looks like a blob of paint, and I think it's really cute. So when I'm talking about squinting to look at something that's foreshortened, now you can see where your perspective of the item changes pretty dramatically, depending on how I'm holding it. When you see it at an angle that makes it more difficult to figure out, and this isn't so different from a leaf or a cluster of leaves because of the way the blob shape happens. I want you to, instead of trying to wrap your brain around it being this object, but at this angle, I want you to just look at that external shape that it occupies. So if you can ignore the interior, basically you're doing like you would do in these silhouettes that we're going to make, or in Procreate, you're sort of doing a color fill. So imagine your brain doing a color fill. So now all you see is that perimeter. That's a much easier shape to be able to draw. And it takes a little while, and I still fight it once in a while because your brain knows what your brain knows, and it has a really hard time ignoring information, especially things it knows. Like, it knows what a horse is. Could you draw it? Maybe, maybe not. But I guarantee you'd have some inaccuracies because your brain is filling in blanks that aren't really there. So I want you to shut off your brains a little bit. And that tip on foreshortening, seeing foreshortening, should be able to help you a little bit. So before we get to this, we want to go over a little bit with our brushes. and just a little warm up. So get out your watercolors. I like to mist mine with water. And oh, top tip, spray bottles. You know how it's always great to get, a good spray bottle for your art kit? This was for face primer for makeup. It's got the finest mist. It is beautiful. So save your really good spray bottles. And I think the first one, and just off to the side, I've also got some water off to the side. You can't see it, but you don't need to see it. It's just water. That's not the exciting part of today. Right. The paints that I'm using are from Lucas, and they are lovely watercolors. They have a real sort of density to them. They're a little bit of a different kind of formula to Aquafine, which is another kind that I use frequently. This is my ugly palette, and this is just full of blobs of Aquafine paint from Dalerani. And yes, I paint out of that even when it's that mucky. So when we're warming up, we're going to do two parts. We're going to do a little bit of just scratchy, swirly, blobby, ugly, because what I want you to do with this is I want you to begin moving paint around and mixing colors just a little bit. And don't worry if you're not mixing attractive colors, that's fine. And every time your paints sort of mingle with one another, and this is a major reason why I don't tidy this up, is because your colors end up having sort of this underwritten harmony together. Basically, you're contaminating all of them in the same sort of way. So they have sort of no choice but to be a little bit harmonious. But this is what we're going to do. So getting a little bit of paint on your brush, I want you, whatever paper you have, whether you're doing this with a sketchbook or you're doing this on watercolor paper, you could do this on cartridge or printer paper, it doesn't matter. We're just getting a feel for what the brush that we've chosen can do or not do, because now is the time to change tools if you need to. I'm a big fan of the warm-up. I'm not really the sportiest person in the world, but I hear that warming up is really good for sports too. So if you wouldn't go out for a run without stretching, I don't think you should paint or draw without having just a little bit of connection time. This is low pressure. Wow, that color pops. That is, I think, the cadmium red light from Lucas. And even on video, that is just screaming. That's a good color. Yeah, whatever you do, I want you to warm up. This is when you and your tool, the idea, whether this is being done in digital or analog, traditional, physical media, whatever you want to say, is you are lessening that distance between you and the tool. You'll see that I end up holding my brushes, my pencils, my pens. Pardon me. I don't talk this much in one go very often, and it's weird not having you talk back. I feel like one of those people dominating the conversation, because I am, but that's why you're here, I guess. Anyway, I want you to lessen that disconnect between you and the tool. The closer you can feel to working as one, as if the tool just sprouts right out of your finger, then the better and the more natural things will feel, and the less you're going to be consumed with Am I doing it right? All right. I hope you've got a nice mess in front of you. Now it's time to put that aside. We're going to do some intentional mark making. All right, so fresh sheet of paper. Again, this doesn't have to be your final paper. This can be practice paper. What I'd like you to do, and again, if you haven't changed brushes and you feel you want to, now is the time. I'm just going to try the huge one just for funsies for a moment so you can see what that looks like. And in fact, if I'm going to use the big one, probably going to have to switch to big paint. So just give that a bit of a mist. All right. Look at that smooshing around. I like big brushes and I cannot lie. All right. So you notice when I'm handling my watercolor, I do a whole lot of just getting it into the brush. I am not particularly precious with any brushes, much like crockery or dishes or whatever. Stuff's meant to hold your food. Use it. Doesn't matter how expensive it is. At the end of the day, it's a plate. At the end of the day, this is a vessel in which I'm going to put paint down. And this is a kind of mark. This is a number 30 round from Aquafine by De La Rowney. Notice how much paint that thing holds. Just look at all that. So this is just taking the brush, giving it a smoosh. These are sort of petal shaped. So what happens when I'm doing this is I'm pushing and I'm releasing. So it's almost does sort of a curve motion. And that's just what I've got left on the brush. I don't think I'm going to use that one. It's a little bit big to be doing on small paper with the constraints of showing what's happening on screen. So I'm going to go back to Peggy's brush, which is Pigeon Letters number 10 round, which is a very excellent brush. All right, looking at our various shapes, think about in nature. I'll bring our little model back just a little bit. Think about in nature. We're not necessarily looking at that yet, but we're thinking about what kind of natural shapes and wild and wiggly things might we see. And this is one of the reasons why I really like Peggy's brush. It's got that, I'm not getting paid to say that or anything. She just made a darn fine brush. She's a good person too. But what I really like is how you can get these wonderfully expressive little lines out of it, but also you can get those big smooshes too. So discover what your tool can do. Now is the time to do that. So give it some wiggles. Do some little marks. Try doing things in circles. What happens when you put two marks together in sort of leafy shapes? Again, this is just warm-up stuff, so you're not making anything pretty at this point. If you are, stop that right now. All right, I think that's pretty good. We've done our messy one. We've done more intentional marks. So I think we're ready to go. Let's paint some nature. All right, one more time, tear that off. Okay, fresh sheet of paper. I'm using, as I mentioned, but if you're just coming in, I'm using cold pressed watercolor paper. This is just a pad It's not 100% cotton. I like 100% cotton, but I don't think it's necessary all the time. And I think you can still learn a lot with more budget-minded papers. So don't allow anybody to be snobby about paper with you. All right, I'm just picking up some of this red because I think it's just really pretty. I'm going to add it to this palette. I'll let my Lucas and my Aquafine mingle. Maybe even dip in a little bit of that. Whoa. Okay. Now when you're mixing colors, now you notice that my bright, bright, bright colors, I've just muted that quite a bit. So now when you look at it, it's not this really intense, hugely bright red. It's influenced by a few different things now. When you mix a warm color and a cool color together, that's where you start getting your more muted tones. So if you don't know why you're making mud, chances are good you've probably got a warm bias color and a cool bias color, and they're basically fighting each other. Something to keep in mind. It's also a really good way to just sort of make things a little more subtle. So not necessarily muddy. I'm just picking a different twig. I think this one is a little bit prettier, a little bit bushier. Might be a little easier for you to see. So just make sure, there we go. I want to make sure you've got plenty of light on the paper here. Oh, Sonia says she loves the blue leaves on the top left. Again, I'm trying not to pay much attention to the chat right now, otherwise I'll just get completely derailed, but I love those too. Those, I think, are the ones, I think those are the ones on the PDF before. Yep, same ones from the cover of the PDF. What I've done with them is I've just added a little bit of mixed media, so that's just adding some graphic lines, which I think can add a really fun quality to the watercolors. But so long as we're talking about those, I'll leave one of these out. Leave, leave. No, that was bad. That was bad even for me. Leave one of those out on the side. When we are looking at either an example from the PDF or something from real life, either from your own garden or perhaps what you see on screen, we are intentionally sort of color drop filling this into just shapes. And that means that when you see a cluster like this, so even more simply, from what you can see on camera, you can see 3 leaves at this very end, 4 if you count that guy, but we're just going to count these. You really only have one major shape because they overlap. Or at the very least, what I would do, and this is the logic of doing this with shapes and just sort of going with it and not drawing it first, is I see the most obvious shape to start with. Now that's going to be what I start with. That's going to be sort of like the key to this whole watercolor thing. So I'm going to just do that couple of marks. So that again is controlling the pressure. So I give it a lot more pressure when I want the width happening. And I'm not really all that bothered if it's not exactly the same shape, like the same point or the same nooks and crannies or munched out bug bite areas of a leaf. I don't care. I want just the basic idea, the impression. So I'm moving up from that and I'm seeing where it connects. Now, when I look there, you can see there's actually, for me, there's this termination before it gets to that next leaf. But I know that the next leaf touches it and it does something like that. Now, you can either fill them completely or not. Technically, this one is underneath, so I wouldn't see that highlight in real life. But I'm going to leave it because it's my my painting, and it's a happy accident. So now I'm going to look at, again, purposely trying to color fill that so that I'm just looking at the outline, the contour that that cluster of leaves makes. I'm going to connect it to where I think it connects. And that's not quite right, but I'm not sweating it because I can bring that leaf back just that little bit. Now you're going to think this strange, maybe. I'm just going to add a little bit of vibrance in there. Normally I would just keep it one solid color, but I just can't resist that cadmium red. Right. I'm going to go in there without even drawing the stem first. And it's really tempting for us to put points on things. Sometimes a leaf curls under and you wouldn't necessarily see that point. Don't be afraid to do that. That's that thing where we're telling our brains to shut up on what they think, what your brain cells think they know. And you're going with what you're observing. At this point, I am feeling really pleased about that. Part of that is because of the colors that I chose, and that I chose to make my watercolor very pigment heavy. So there's a boldness to it. So when we communicate with color like this, when we're adding those deep, rich colors and very pigmented amounts of watercolor on our brush, we're basically taking a position of authority over your eyeballs, over the viewer's eyeballs. And I'm saying, look at this. Look how confidently I put this down in this color. This is absolutely how it's supposed to look. Otherwise, I would use weak colors, right? Well, at least that's the way I look at it. So now I'm going to work my way up that stem that I just sort of drew in place. I didn't analyze it. I just glanced at my stem and I noticed that it's got a subtle curve to it. So that's all I'm doing. But next leaf up, I see again where those shapes overlap. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put that one in for that edge. And I know it overlaps with this one. Oh, did you see what I did there? Went ahead and I skipped the other half of that leaf. And I'm going to finish drawing that one in. But that one is really blunt. So it's a different shape. This one, the beginning of it is actually a little hidden, but I'm not going to sweat it. There are a couple of little white gaps along that stem, and I like it that way. A little bit more water on there. And now where I've got a stem that crisscrosses that stem, or a leaf that crisscrosses that stem, just painting that in there. And believe it or not, I'm not even looking at the thing that's in front of me. I'm actually looking, I've got what you see on a computer monitor halfway across this room, and I am probably painting exactly what you see, which might be why it perhaps looks similar. You see, as I go, one of the things that you can keep in mind is no one else is going to see this reference. So as I go, I am doing what I want to do, which is get some more of that color in there. And I am aiming for the perception of believable, which is very different to clinical accuracy. If I were into clinical accuracy, I'm not sure I would be using watercolor. It took me a very long time to even like using watercolor because I was used to acrylic and I was used to oil. I was used to things that would do what I told it. Okay, now this is a part of This I don't see as well, but you're going to notice your brain doesn't want you to put things in what it perceives as illogical positions. Like when things overlap, but let it, just go with it. Shut your brain off, squint if you have to see shapes. Ooh, that shape went really weird. But this is where I'm just going to say, you know what? My plant, my rules. And as long as I can make it look like it's probably somewhat correct, nobody's going to bother fact-checking my twig. And kind of wish I had started this a little bit further down the paper because it's really lovely. And I want to do more, but I'm going to have to leave that bit off. So this little bit from this extra stem, that's okay. Doesn't matter. So when we're doing this, I hope you're still remembering that you're looking at teardrop shapes and kites. So like this would be more of a teardrop. This is a little bit kind of both because of the way it terminates into the stem. But we're looking at those very basic shapes, those lovely things that we could draw outlines on. And that is what we're paying attention to. So when I'm looking on screen, same screen you're seeing, I am not letting myself think that that is a leaf. That's simply a green blob that has an outline shape to it, a contour to it. And that I can work with, that I can translate. So just looking up at the chat and right, any questions? Hi from Luxembourg. Oh my goodness. Scotland. Oh, hello everybody. Belgium. Oh, you're all fabulous. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to leave that just as it is because I think that's really pretty. Now you notice I've got it bravely right next to the reference. Do they look close enough to you? Do you think if I took that away, you would still be pleased with that branch of leaves? That twig of leaves? I think I am. And this is that point where I feel like I want to add a little bit more. But this is where I say, dial it back. You need to edit these things and resist the urge to put too much in. There are all kinds of details I could obsess about. But if I'm doing something in silhouette, it's not about the detail. Don't forget Costa Rica. I do not forget Costa Rica. Absolutely not. I'm so glad you're here. Really, really glad. We haven't been in touch much recently, but I'm so glad you're here. So, what do you think? How are yours coming along? Are you working from the same as I am? Do you have your own twigs from your garden? Do you have a photo that you're referencing? I'd love to know. So I hope that is very useful for you and encouraging. And knowing that these sessions never last as long as I want them to, we're going to do a little bit of mixed media on what I have already made. How can I set that there? All right. Oh, I don't want to take that away in case you're painting from it. I'll take away these other ones. I've got a whole bucket of leaves. And what's funny is I feel like I was curating exactly what leaves are exactly the most artistic and correct leaves to have for you. It's so funny. Anyway, oh, that one brought in a little bug. Go away, little bug. Okay, so I've got that off to the side. that's still there in case you want to use it. And when I say mixed media on these, I like, because we've got something very bold and very flat, I like bringing in graphic details that are just a little extra cute or whimsical or playful. So on this one, I used one of these purple, I used a purple Lyra. These are watercolor based crayons, but you can use just regular old crayons too. I promise you, if it's been years or decades or however long since you had a proper box of crayons, then I very much suggest that you go get one because they are so fun. There's no excuse for not coloring and doing, because it's not expensive compared to, like the price difference between these two, or if you use Neocolors, that sort of thing. The price difference is huge. But if you could practice and play and get to know shape and line with something as inexpensive as a bit of Crayola crayons, child's crayons, that's freedom. And then use up all the paper, as much paper as you can get your hands on. I mean, printer paper, kids' paper, doesn't matter. So I've just chosen a few colors out of the cheap and cheery Crayolas. And looking at this cluster, so this is the same kind of leaf that is in the PDF that I said was hard mode, because it's got these really funny little intricate leaves. But what might I do with these to highlight them? I kind of like playing with the shapes as if they're echoing, maybe a little bit. Kind of cartoons them a little bit. It's a great way to play with color. And I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing. And that's what I want you to do, is just do. Have fun. I really like the look of that though. And I'm going, excuse me, I'm going to set those aside. I'm going to go with one of these, which these are a lot more heavily pigmented. So you will see probably a pretty big difference with the way they look. But I really like this effect when I put sort of fake stems in place. And I don't know what direction those leaves went anymore, because, I drew them when they were in silhouette in front of me. But because I'm paying attention to that contour line, that's when my brain is actually beginning to put things together and figure it out. Now that one's a little bit funny. That one must have been one of those shapes that I said are more like the foreshortened shapes, because I'm really not sure what's going on with that one, but that's okay. We're going to make a decision. I'm going to pretend it sort of curled that way. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. That's fine. But you can just add some fun details. I love that snap that a wax crayon can make when it really sort of sticks to the paper. Now, of course, you don't have to do mixed media details. And in fact, if you want to do something a little bit different, actually, maybe I'll pick that. Yeah, maybe a little yellow. This is a very, very, very bold yellow. Maybe instead of using crayons and markers or whatever you've got in front of you, maybe you'd rather just go in and do some color shapes on top. Now that you know the trick to making easy, believable leaf cluster silhouettes, you can make a million of these and try all of your ideas. So, yeah, I haven't done this before. It was just an idea that came to me while I'm here with you. But you know what? I think I like it. Maybe I'll change that color up for a leaf that I think might be not getting the same amount of light. And do I know where all my leaves are? No, but I've got some clues. I'm going to pretend, because if I can't figure it out, I doubt anybody else is going to either. As long as I make it look good, what I think is good, which is a very subjective thing. If I can make it look good, nobody's going to question me on it. One of the fun things you can do is pay attention to your color wheel. Go away, little bug. Pay attention to your color wheel and think about complementary colors and opposites and, you know, quads and tris and all that. Like, just looking at a color wheel, what colors do you think would look pretty good together? I've got yellow and purple and green there. I like that palette. Over here with blue and purple, I think throwing in maybe a little bit of orange could be fun. Could be disastrous, who knows? But I can make more. I think that actually gave it a little bit of pop, so now it looks a little bit more dimensional again. So I think that is where I am going to leave it with you today, because we are rapidly running out of time, and I want to make sure that maybe we can answer some questions. As I said, there's a very slight delay on what I see in the chat, but I would love to answer any questions if anyone has any. I'm just skimming back and I see ugly palettes are the best. You're right, they are. Yeah, this is an enamel plate, just a divided enamel plate, and I absolutely adore it. Enamelware is so good for palettes, for watercolor. And I like this one because it's got the dividers. So it kind of keeps my colors a little bit separate. But then I just refill it by squirting blobs in the corners. I did get a fancy little label printer though, so I made teeny tiny labels. So I printed multiple lines on a single label so that I've actually got them labeled, which is handy, especially if anyone asks. On the underside of it, and it's going to be hard to show you without me tipping it and pouring paint everywhere, but I've added little rubber stick-on feet. That way it doesn't make a terrible clatter. And I just like it. I'm not a big fan of like noise and calamity. So I like that. And just looking back down at the chat, I drew your leaves. Appreciate this approach at looking at leaf shapes. Thank you. Just trying to ignore what your brain wants to do, because your brain will always, and this was something that I ran up against in life drawing so frequently, is when I was teaching life drawing and people almost always leave off certain things that they're uncertain about. Like I would get lots of people drawing torsos, but they would avoid hands, feet, and faces, because that's where your brain takes over and starts criticizing you a lot, and it feels tricky. And it is. I won't kid you. It can be tricky to get a handle on that sort of thing. But the more you practice and the more you start looking at things as basic shapes, the more you can look at the outline of a thing, just like we did here where our leaves are overlapping, we look at that as a whole rather than a cluster, and we get it out of our head that this is, pretend you're a space alien and you don't know what a leaf is. You have no way of interpreting it, but you must draw it on your space iPad. Yeah, let's call it that. You have to draw it for a report on your space iPad to your space people, space aliens, whatever they are. You might find it difficult to relate what that is, but if you can break it down and just say, okay, well, I see the outline of it. That helps me to determine what it is. When you see silhouettes anytime, whether they're the old like cameo style, like the little oval jewelry or Jane Austen type looking cameo silhouettes, you still get an idea of the person. You still get an idea of what is happening, and you don't need the details. Details, brains are lovely beasts for wanting to trip you up with what it thinks it knows and making connections. Our brains are always very excited to make connections, and a lot of times they're wrong. So like in life drawing, trying to get people over that hurdle and to begin looking at, like I said, foreshortening, like if I do my fingers like that, or you're looking at things from unusual angles. If you think about these as hands, you're going to have a terrible time trying to draw them. But if you start looking at them as, well, there is this sort of blocky square shape with some circles on it and some little rectangles that are inside. So you start breaking things down into shapes, it becomes much more manageable. So if I didn't know that was called a hand, or if I didn't know that was called a leaf, I would still be able to document it in some way. This looks really like autumn, doesn't it? I feel like this is premature since we're still in summer. Right, just looking over at the chat because there are some lovely people from Skillshare behind the scenes, pulling all the levers and buttons and whatnot, making things happen. And yes, please share your creations. If you are sharing what you have made, and I would love it if you did, please tag me. I'm on most social media as @JenDixonArts, here on YouTube as @JenDixon. And you can always look me up on Skillshare, where I've been a top teacher since 2016. So I feel like one of the old guard there, but I love it, and I've got a lot of good stuff planned for you. I kind of slowed down on my productions there, but I'm back. I'm doing stuff. I'm feeling good, and I'd love for you to join me in class there. So please tag on Instagram, Facebook, wherever. I'm there. And I'd love to see your leaves and your nature. Ah, Esther's saying something about needing something just on foreshortening. It's funny because when I did become a Skillshare teacher, I was still actively doing an awful lot of life drawing, and I wanted desperately to figure out a way to do life drawing classes on Skillshare, but I couldn't figure out how to get away from naked people on Skillshare, which I thought they would frown upon. So I never did it. But foreshortening is such an important part of life drawing because of the organic nature of the strange, like, electric meat that we are as humans, that learning to see those shapes and learning to squint your eyes, try to break it down. One of the things that I've taught before with dealing with hands is actually just drawing. I won't do it right now, but I've actually drawn sort of the armature. If you can imagine a ball and a stick and a ball and a stick and a ball and a stick and a ball, and you just imagine what the little armature is inside, it actually makes it a lot easier to fashion electric meat on it. But that's all for another time. Maybe I will figure out a way to not have naked people on Skillshare and still teach some foreshortening. So stay tuned for that. All right. Skimming the chat, I don't see any burning questions. Oh, thank you for the compliment, Esther, on the rubber feet on my palette. It does make a difference. It's so funny because when you're in the zone and everything is very peaceful and you're doing this lovely painting, you know, the last thing you want to hear is something clattering around. So I do like that. Right, everybody? I think that's it. So we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I hope that you become a little bit addicted to drawing leaves. Remember to always do your warm-ups. So get in there and do your ugly work first. Find your shapes, build that connection to your tools. The better you know your tools, the less you need to think about them, and the more you get to focus on the art and the fun part, you know, like color mixing, things like that. So thank you very much for being here. Check out my classes on Skillshare if you haven't already. I've got a lot of good ones on there that will help you with seeing things a little differently and bringing nature and fundamental techniques into your work. Oh, thank you guys. Just gonna switch back to my face for a moment and say thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope you had a lovely time painting some leaves with me. And I'll see you elsewhere. Thanks so much.